Who are your biggest dynasty buys and sells this season? That and so much more on today's episode of the Launchpad. Michael, start us off. Who is your biggest buy in dynasty leagues this year?
For me right now, it has to be Kyler Murray. I mean, Kyler Murray's ADP right now, according to bulletproof.com, is at the 301. That's the QB 13. And if you look at what he's done over his career, I mean, you look at his in the last 4 years, his QB 12, QB 4, QB 4, and QB 7 if you remove the game that he left early. And I think a lot of dynasty players are really playing redraft style. You know, they're not looking at the long game. And Kyler Murray is still just 25 years old. He's in an area right now, only him, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson have been top 12 each of the past 3 seasons. He has one of only 4 quarterbacks that have 20-plus fantasy points per game in their first 4 seasons. And when he's on the field, he's absolutely elite. I mean, I know we have to look at the injury. And when we play things at Smash Accept, the way we talk about things, you want to be top 3 or bottom 3. Right. So we want Kyler Murray for the end of the season where we either going to win the championship or he's going to get us that 101. Right now, you're looking at Kyler Murray potentially, from a lot of key factors right now, coming back maybe week 6 to 8, maybe a little bit later here. And I think if you exhibit patience, this is a guy that is just a absolute screaming value right now. If you look at the past of 6 notable quarterbacks who have returned in less than 9 months, you look at Deshaun Watson, he was QB 4. Burrow, QB 8, Donovan McNabb, QB 14. I mean, these guys were able to bounce back, and Kyler Murray is an elite athlete. So I believe he's my absolute biggest buy in Dynasty right now.
So I know we're talking about dynasty, but Kyler Murray is somebody that I've been beating the drum for all offseason. Even at looking at 2023 outlook right now in best ball leagues, he is my most rostered quarterback. And people, especially when talking about dynasty, we talk about looking long term and all that, but people have such short goldfish brains. And what they see last year is a disaster of a team in the final year under Cliff Kingsbury. They see Kyler Murray get hurt, and then all of a sudden they forget that this guy is just a top 5 fantasy output machine when he's on the field. So I'm completely with you. Let me throw one question your way, though. If you draft him this year in a startup and you take him as QB 13, if he doesn't play a single game in 2023, do you still think he's worth that? Because, I mean, the way I'm looking at it, when I'm drafting him that low, I could throw this entire season away and still be happy with getting Kyler Murray at that value.
Yeah, because where he's going right now, I mean, you look at it, if it's at 212, 301, you already got Patrick Mahomes on your team, right? So Josh Allen, depending on which way you want to play it. Now, all of a sudden, you get Kyler Murray in that spot where that asset is just going to completely rise. I mean, right now, he was going late first. I feel like by this time next year, he'll be going in that same area. And especially on a rebuilding team, like what I'm doing now is I'm scaling back off of Justin Fields, who I know you and I both love, or Trevor Lawrence, or maybe even Lamar Jackson, scaling back for what we call insulated trades, where you're trying to add multiple first-round picks on top, because he's going to catch up to those guys. I mean, value-wise, he's just going to rise as soon as – and then once we get into next year, I know the biggest thing that people are worried about is, are they going to draft another quarterback? I mean, I don't think that happens based off of the contract and everything else involved with Kyler Murray.
And you know what? Even if they do draft another quarterback for whatever reason, they tank out this year, get 3 or 4 wins, draft Caleb Williams, it's not like Kyler Murray is going to be a backup anywhere. Like with the money that he's got tied to him, if he does hit the trade market or whatever it may be, if the Cardinals trade back, I mean, what I'm getting at is there's almost no chance that Kyler Murray isn't starting somewhere in 2024. So completely love that. Meng, do you want to add anything before we get into some introductions here? Anything you'd like to add on Kyler Murray?
No, I think Mike covered it pretty well, and he's a great pick if you have a hybrid fantasy football/baseball league too, just in case, right?
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and get into the introductions here. Just want to welcome everybody now to episode 73 of The Launchpad. You can find the show on all Football Guys channels, so just search Dave Kluge, Football Guys, The Launchpad, whatever, you'll be able to find this show. No problems at all. Today I am joined with Michael Royer and Meng Song. Guys, we connected years and years and years ago when I was brand new in the industry. This is one of the first shows that I ever got to guest on, was the Smash Accept podcast. If you're watching on or listening on podcast, you won't see this, but for my YouTube guys, still repping the brand right here, Smash Accept. Been a longtime fan and supporter, so absolutely thrilled to link up with you guys again. But let's go ahead and dive in. Meng, you just introduced yourself. Now let's hear your favorite Dynasty buy of the 2023 offseason.
Yeah, and we always talk about buy lows and sell highs, right? But sometimes it's okay to buy high on a player that we know is really, really good. And in the last 7 years, Mark Andrews has been the only tight end not named Travis Kelce to finish as the top overall fantasy tight end in a season. And last year, Andrews led all tight ends in target share, air yards, and he was fourth in red zone targets. And that was with Lamar Jackson having missed 5 games. The biggest factor that's been working against Andrews has just been the lack of passing volume and offensive plays overall for Baltimore. And in the last 4 seasons with Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, the Ravens have ranked 31st, 31st, 15th, and 23rd in pass rate over expected. And it just so happens that in 2021, the one season when the Ravens were league average in pass rate over expected, Andrews scored 18 PPR points per game and finished ahead of Kelsey as the top fantasy tight end. So with Todd Monken taking over as the offensive coordinator in 2023, I expect the Ravens pass rate over expected to return to at least league average, maybe a little higher even. Monken has also played quickly in neutral situation pace, so nothing really needs to change with Andrews in terms of usage or efficiency. In general, just a faster, more pass heavy Ravens offense is going to increase overall target volume. And in best ball and redraft, I've been passing on Kelsey a lot to grab Andrews 2 rounds cheaper. And he's similarly a buy for me in Dynasty. It's kind of crazy to me that Andrews is only being drafted a few spots ahead of Pitts and Kelsey in Dynasty startups, even though he has a much better quarterback and offense than Pitts. And he's almost 6 years younger than Kelsey. I know Kelsey's amazing, but he's got to fall off at some point, right?
Yeah, and I just did a mock draft today, a 1 QB dynasty mock startup with the guys over at Front Yard Fantasy. And granted, it's a mock, no money on the line. So there are some weird values there, but I was blown away. Remember, this is a one quarterback, so every value is getting pushed up outside of the quarterbacks. I got Andrews at 307. Like, people have just forgotten how good this guy is, and I think that there is a huge advantage that you can get if you're able to lock in one of those elite tight ends. And let's face it, Travis Kelce isn't getting any younger, so somebody's going to have to dethrone him eventually as the dynasty tight end. It's kind of a perfect segue into the guy that I want to talk about. Mung, you're sitting here talking up Mark Andrews, who has every opportunity to blow up. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kyle Pitts. And I think that these guys, whether it's Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, they're going to be 1, 2, and 3 in your dynasty rankings, one way or another, depending on whether you're competing or contending. But kind of like Mark Andrews, you're talking about how he's got the underlying metrics that are just blowing people away, and he was just a changed situation, which we saw 2 years ago from putting up elite fantasy production. That's exactly what we're seeing with Kyle Pitts. I mean, when you look at his rate metrics, last year he pulled a 34.1% air yard share, which was first among all tight ends, 13.1 yards per target depth, first among all tight ends. A 26.6% target share, was second among all tight ends, but only behind Travis Kelce. And that's like elite wide receiver target share that we're looking at right there. Targets per route run, yards per route run, he was in the top 5 for both of those. But the issue, obviously, is that he was playing in Atlanta, which, much like the Greg Roman offense that you talked about in Baltimore, is just a slow-paced, run-first offense. So the volume wasn't there. Now, if we're looking on a long-term basis, these are the type of players that we want to invest in because they might blow up right now. It might take a couple of years, but whether it's a trade, a new quarterback, a coaching change, he's already shown us that he can draw an elite number of targets. He can draw them deep downfield. He can do a lot with those targets. So we just need to see the pass volume increase a little bit. And he's still just 22 years old. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's younger than Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson. Talking about some of the tight ends. He's younger than Daniel Bellinger and Greg Dulcich, who were rookies last year. He's younger than Trey McBride, Zay Flowers. I can go on and on. He's younger than Spencer Rattler, who's getting drafted next year, most likely. I mean, we know that the Falcons aren't throwing the ball a lot right now, but what happens if by some odd chance Kyle Pitts gets traded to the Bengals or the Chargers or one of these high-flying offenses? All of a sudden, Kyle Pitts is challenging Travis Kelce as the overall tight end 1 in redraft. So this is the guy right now that you can get him in the second, maybe early third round of your startup drafts. He's a guy that I'm trying to get wherever I can because I think that the hype from his rookie season has started to sizzle down a little bit, and now people are starting to get concerned that he's not going to break out, but everything he's showing underlying tells us that he is a changed situation away from absolutely exploding. So I think we could just talk about both of these tight ends right now because these are the guys we want to invest in, Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. Do you think that there's any chance, I can throw this question to either you, Michael or Mung, is there any chance that anybody, looking at TJ Hawkinson or Pat Freiermuth, do you see any of these guys surpassing Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts in dynasty value in the near future?
No, I think there's such a value difference, right? You want those top three guys, and yeah, we like Kittle, and a lot of people are big on Kincaid and Dallas Goedert, but no one's catching up to these three. I mean, these three are in a tier of their own, and I like to. Mung says it all the time on our podcast. Whichever way you can get a little bit added on, like one of our guys is in a rebuild in the Patreon. He said, "I'm trying to move Kelsey." He got Mark Andrews plus a second. Whatever you can get on top of any of these guys right now, that's the way to do it.
I don't know if you guys saw earlier on Twitter today, but there was a trade that was circulating that just blew my mind. Dynasty_analyst Emerson Breary, he showed a trade where he gave up Chris Olave and got Matthew Stafford and Kyle Pitts. So that shows that there are some Kyle Pitts dynasty owners out there that are starting to freak out a little bit and selling him for cheap. Mung, again, just talking about these two guys here, do you see anybody possibly surpassing them in value, or are these like the two clear-cut younger guys that you want to invest in if you're not trying to win now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the top tier and no one else is in it. But to play devil's advocate, I will say that if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith were to potentially miss time, Dallas Goedert could potentially elevate into that tier. The talent is there. It's just that the target share is not just yet.
Yeah, and we saw that last year on a small sample, but when he was able to be the number 2 option, he was just blowing up in Philadelphia. So like that call out as well. Michael, let's throw it back to you. Let's talk about another dynasty buy here. Who else do you have on the table for us?
It's going to be very similar to yours. I mean, you brought up Kyle Pitts. Mine's Drake London. If you look back, like you said, we have multiple listener leagues. We're up to Smash Accept 11 now. But when we did Smash Accept 4, back in February, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London were all very similar in their ADP. I mean, if you look at these guys, if you look at wide receivers who have eclipsed 80% PFF grades plus a 22% target share as rookies, over the last couple of years, you're looking at Odell Beckham, Mike Evans, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and those 3 rookies. All 3 of them have an elite ceiling. But right now, Drake London is in that mid-4th range, while Garrett Wilson has moved up to the mid-2nd. And you look at, Chris Olave has moved up to the end of the 2nd. So there's a huge buy window right now for Drake London. If you look what he was able to do with a subpar offense, to say the least. The quarterback play was extremely rough. But if you look at what his stats and what he was able to do during the season, I mean, 117 targets, 87 receptions, 866 yards. But when you look at the final 5 games when Ritter took over, when you had Marcus Mariota, it was extremely run-centric, heavy run team. You look at what he was able to do over those final 5 games, 31 receptions, 428 yards, and almost 13 yards per reception. So if Ritter, he's either going to win the job, keep it for next year, or they're going to be able to bring in another quarterback. I think the draft capital, the age, he's 21 years old with an 18.1 breakout age. That's all 99th percentile. This guy is elite. I think this is someone that right now should be valued the same way as Olave and Garrett Wilson, but he is going considerably less. I actually bought him I gave up Garrett Wilson and got Drake London and a mid-24 first the other day.
Ooh, that's nice. I like that. That's a fun one to make right there. And, you talk about them upping the pass rate a little bit. It wasn't significant, but they did go with Marcus Mariota, 23 pass attempts to 28 pass attempts with Desmond Ritter. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come. And then you talk about, how much he was drawing targets. Let me just top 5 in target share last year. Devontae Adams, obviously, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, the names you'd expect to be up there, and then Drake London in his rookie season was 5th in the NFL in target share. So again, just like we said with Kyle Pitts, these guys with these underlying peripherals that are pulling targets at an elite rate are the guys you want to invest in. Just imagine, we'll rewind a little bit. I wanted it to happen so badly when Lamar was going through his contract disputes. Imagine plugging Lamar Jackson into this Atlanta Falcons offense. You immediately, Drake London would be going at the 1-2 turn. Kyle Pitts would be the unanimous tight end 1. And that's what we're looking for right now, is just that quarterback or a coaching change that can unlock the talent with these guys. Mung, we're looking at Drake London and Kyle Pitts, 2 unbelievable talents. We've also got Bijan Robinson in the backfield. Are you expecting much out of this offense, or is this going to be one of those too many mouths to feed situations in Atlanta?
Yeah, and you guys touched on it. My only concern with London and Pitts, you guys talked about the per route metrics, the per target metrics, and they're phenomenal. The only concern is that even though they have the dominant slices of this piece of pie in Atlanta, the overall pie might not be as big, right? they obviously drafted Bijan Robinson for a reason. You can debate whether or not it was too early to draft a running back, but he's a great fit for this Arthur Smith offense. And my only concern is we saw what Arthur Smith really wanted to do when he had a guy like Derrick Henry in Tennessee. And in those last 2 seasons, when he was the offensive coordinator there, they ranked 30th and 30th in pass rate over expectation. So the concern is with Ritter, even if he is a decent fill in quarterback for now, whether or not they get an upgrade in the future, in 2023 at least, I don't know that London and Pitts have the volume to really get that fantasy upside that we want despite their talent.
Yeah, and in that year in Tennessee too that you're talking about, it's not like Derrick Henry was the only player there. He wasn't like surrounded by scrubs. They had Ryan Tannehill, who was, pretty much at his peak, and he was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league at that time. They had a young AJ Brown. They had, an over the hill Julio Jones, but like they still had the personnel where they could have thrown the ball. But this is just Arthur Smith's tendencies. So that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to hold these guys back. So if you're holding on to Drake London and Kyle Pitts, you're hoping that there's going to be a trade at some point that puts them in a better situation. But Meng, back to you. Let's talk about one of your buys right now in Dynasty.
Sure. One of my buys is an elusive runner who has game-breaking sub 4.4 speed, is a receiving threat who had a 93rd percentile college target share, and is likely to be in a committee backfield on a good offense as a rookie. Who did I just describe? If your answer is Jahmyr Gibbs, then you are correct. But if your answer is Devon Achane, then you are also correct. Now, shameless plug, I have a series of articles on Fantrax right now talking about wish versions of certain players available for much cheaper. And Achane is one of them, comparing him to Gibbs. And I keep hearing the narrative that Achane is too small, and I get it. I don't think anyone's expecting him to be a workhorse at 188 pounds. But at the same time, Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't project as a workhorse either at 199. Both of these running backs played in the SEC, and Achane's 14.8 carries per game in college was actually higher than Gibbs's 12.3 carries per game. So I think he can hold up to a fair-sized workload, even if neither of them are going to be true workhorses. And at the end of the day, we're not expecting either of these guys to get 20 runs up the middle in games, or at least I hope not, or else their offensive coordinators are using them very, very incorrectly. And David Montgomery is going to see some early down and goal line work in Detroit. Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson are going to factor into Miami's backfield. But the important things for these two running backs are big playability and passing down work. And I think Achane can see that. So will Gibbs. But again, at their prices, I'd much prefer to buy Achane in Dynasty. The gap between them in value is way too big, I think. And there's a non-zero chance. I'm still taking Gibbs over Achane for sure in Dynasty, but there's a non-zero chance that Achane could outscore Gibbs in 2023.
Completely with everything you said there. I've been talking about Achane nonstop this offseason. Now, we're recording this show on Wednesday night, and we just got word this morning that the Miami Dolphins made an offer to Dalvin Cook, but it's not enough that Dalvin Cook is ready to immediately sign. I think I know how you're going to answer this question, Mung, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. If Dalvin Cook signs with the Miami Dolphins, what does that do to Achane? Do you push him down in your rankings? Does he become more of a buy? Walk us through that situation if it does happen.
Sure. I do think his value would drop in most dynasty leagues, and I think he would be a buy at that point. I actually answered a question on Twitter not too long ago when all this Cook talk was first surfacing. And I think Cook basically kills Mostert and Wilson's value. But I think Achane's going to have that specialized role where they want to use him as a receiver. They want to get him into space on screens and little trick plays from behind the line of scrimmage. So at the end of the day, I don't think he's necessarily going to be a consistent producer. But I do think he can be a boom or bust RB2 with high league-winning upside if he were to get any sort of workload in that 50 to 60% range, more than we're expecting right now.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to buy Achane, the best case scenario is that they go out and they sign Dalvin Cook. Because like you said, it's going to push his value down, and realistically, it's not going to change all that much. They're going to end up having to cut another veteran to make room for him. And really, when you start looking at the numbers, I don't know if it makes any sense for Miami to even bring Dalvin Cook in. I mean, maybe by the time this podcast airs, they sign him and I have egg all over my face. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to open up cutting one of these guys, and they're going to eat either $2.2 million cutting Mostert or $2.8 million cutting Jeff Wilson Jr., plus what they're going to have to allocate to Dalvin Cook. Just doesn't make any sense to me why they would want to do that. I mean, they're going to end up having to tie up a ton of money in Dalvin Cook, who I've been shouting it from the rooftops all offseason. People don't want to hear it yet, but he might be washed. He didn't look too good last year. I think he's on his last leg. So hopefully they can stick with the running back room that they have and give those opportunities to Devin Achane. Michael, before we talk about my final buy here, is there anything you'd like to add about Achane or this Miami Dolphins backfield?
Yeah, I think like you talked about with Dalvin Cook, that would create the ultimate buy window. I mean, Devin Achane is a guy that we comped to Tony Pollard, very similar size, the way he plays. And Pollard succeeds from 10 to 12 carries, maybe 15 max. And that's what we were looking at, from Achane as well, is a 10 to 12 touch type scenario where he was never going to be the bell cow. He's not a guy that's going to get 25, 30 touches. So you get in a similar situation where Dalvin comes in and it doesn't actually hurt his value. It's just more of his perceived value.
Exactly. And those are the best situations when you can take advantage of the people who overreact to a signing like that to invest in a very good profile like Achane. Now, I'm going to wrap it up talking about a guy that I have been beating the drum for years and years and years, and I'm going to do it again right now. You've probably heard about him a bunch this offseason, but I'm going to keep screaming about it. And we talked about wanting to invest in guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London who show us that they can produce, but aren't doing it on a small sample size. And that's exactly what Marquise Brown did for years. We saw him in Baltimore. And, Meng, earlier, you talked about all the metrics, with Greg Roman and that offense and how much they put a hindrance on offensive production there. But you could see with the targets that he was pulling, where he was pulling them deep downfield, his yards per route run, that he was a very good player that just wasn't getting the volume that he needed for fantasy. And then guess what happened? He got traded to Arizona with their air raid scheme. They started throwing the ball a ton, and all of a sudden he jumped up to 10.7 targets per game when he was playing with no DeAndre Hopkins and a healthy Kyler Murray. During that stretch, he was the wide receiver 5 in PPR scoring behind just Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. This just paints a picture for the ceiling. Now, I'm not saying that Marquise Brown is a top 5 receiver in the NFL, but it shows the ceiling that he could have if he continues to play at this level in Arizona. He was on pace for 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. And now, of course, DeAndre Hopkins is out of the picture. And right now, I think one of the reasons that his cost is so suppressed is because there's the fear that with Kyler Murray missing, whether it's a few weeks, half a season, the entire year, that he's not going to be able to get it done. But at the end of the day, he has already showed that he has this alpha profile. So regardless of who the quarterback is, he's going to get fed. And then when Kyler Murray does return, he's going to have an unlimited ceiling where he could be one of the best fantasy wide receivers in the NFL. So again, we've talked about Kyler Murray a little bit earlier, and he's got a huge discount right now because of his ACL tear, but I don't see many situations where Kyler Murray doesn't return at some point this season. He could be back as early as September, which would be great, but I think if they get towards the end of the year, there's going to be either two paths that they're going to have to take. Either one, they're competing, and Kyler Murray is going to want to come back in and push them towards a playoff push. Highly unlikely considering the current state of the roster. But the other situation is that they aren't competing, but they are competing for the number 1 overall pick, in which case they would want to trade Kyler Murray, and they're going to want to put him back out there for the final few weeks of the season, show that he can still play on that leg, and hope to increase his trade value before the offseason. So that is kind of the worst case scenario right now, is that Kyler Murray comes back for the very end of the season, in which case you see Marquise Brown get that boom at the end of the year towards the fantasy playoffs when those weeks are so much more valuable. So Marquise Brown has displayed an elite profile so far. He showed us at a small sample size what he can do in a pass-heavy offense. He's a guy right now that, again, I just cannot stop drafting. I'm talking about this mock draft that I did earlier today. I got Marquise Brown at 607. He was going in the 4th round last year, showed us that he can put up top 5 numbers in a new offense, and then Kyler Murray gets hurt, and you're getting him at a huge discount. So I cannot buy enough of Marquise Brown in my dynasty leagues right now. Meng, I know you're with me on this one. You got anything you want to add about Marquise Brown?
Yeah, I'll co-sign that 1,000%, 10,000%. I have so much Marquise Brown exposure in best ball. I have him in multiple dynasty leagues. And to your point, one of the primary concerns was what if Kyler Murray misses a lot of games, right? And to that, obviously the efficiency wouldn't be as good with Tune or McCoy or whoever is starting for the Cardinals. But at the same time, even if they're hashtag collapsing for Caleb and looking to tank, at the end of the day, their defense is so bad that they're still going to be placed in shootouts. And I think
Mhm.
even if the efficiency isn't there for Marquise Brown, the volume at least is going to be. And at the very least, I think he's flex worthy. And like you said, if the stars align, top 5 ceiling, even though we're not necessarily expecting that.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're looking at the target competition right now in Arizona, you talked about the bad defense. They're going to have to throw the ball. They're going to be playing catch up. There's going to be garbage time. And who are those balls going to? I mean, Rondale Moore is fun and athletic, but I think we know that he's probably not going to take away a majority of the targets there. You know, you got Mike Wilson, the rookie, who are getting some, strong reports from out of camp. But at the end of the day, there's one top dog sitting there right now in Arizona, and it is very clearly Marquise Brown. Now, in this show, from an entertainment value, it's fun when people disagree. We get back and forth and people get chippy and start really making a case for themselves. We didn't get a lot of that today. I mean, today was a lot of agreement, but I think what that tells you is if all three of us are in agreement on these are the guys you should buy and these are the guys you should sell, I think we got some pretty bulletproof analysis here that you should really take to heart. Guys, it's been a blast today. Always a good time getting to talk some football with you guys. Just a couple of months away from the season here. Hopefully it can come soon because it has been a long and arduous offseason. But you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. Be sure to subscribe at footballguys.com where you can get so much valuable information. We actually have a new rankings platform that you got to check out that is completely customizable to your league settings. So you pick the league size, scoring settings, roster settings. We know that your leagues are very customizable these days. So we wanted to make a set of rankings that is going to be equally as customizable. You can find that at footballguys.com/rankings. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. Over on the right side of your screen, you're going to see some other videos that we have coming out here at Football Guys. You'll also see a button where you could subscribe to check out all the content we have coming your way at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for tuning in.